Welcome, welcome, welcome to another of our Wednesday yachting luncheons. It's beautiful to be here in the new year 2019. Looking out our windows, where else can you have lunch and watch the race course at the same time? Before we get to our topic today, let's talk a little bit about future speakers. So we're going to have a roast of one Terry Anderlini on May 27th. So get your material ready because this is a target-rich environment. Dewey Hines will do us the honor in March the 20th and talk to us about St. Francis Yacht Club in the 50s. He joined in 54, so he knows of what he speaks. General four-star George R. Sullivan will be here on February 20 to talk about the national security implications of global climate change. This is a four-star general who's going to talk to us on that subject. Bill Wells, closer to home, on February the 6th, will talk to us about a history of yachting in the Delta. Bill Chrysler will be here on Jan 30 to talk all about the St. Francis Sailing Foundation. Our Commodore, Paul Heineken, who I'm going to call up in just a moment, will be here with Pam Healy to talk about looking ahead for 2019 on January 23rd. The San Francisco Sailing Science Center, President and founder Jim Hancock will be here next week on the 16th. So we have incredible speakers lined up, as you can hear. And our speaker, our Commodore, fresh from yesterday, is here to say a few words. Commodore Paul the Man Heineken. Congratulations, sir.
All right. Thank you. It's great to be here. This is my second official duty. No, my third. My second was to park in the Commodore's spot outside. No, this is wonderful to see everybody here and to hear about the history of Tinsley. We've needed this for a very long time to get caught up. I have to tell my first trip. Janet and I were up in a chalk-sided Columbia 24 that we borrowed. We'd done the whole Delta. This is in the late 70s. And I pull in finally to Tinsley Island. I'm a St. Francis member, to the east side of the main dock, where I was very quickly informed that that was not the place for a boat that looked like mine. And then I slid down the dock because sailboats were on the lighthouse side of the main dock, and then they just sort of sneered at me as they went by. But I was in a reasonable spot. There was no berm. I'm sure we'll hear all about that. You could look straight out from the swimming pool to the boats. It was soggy wonderland. So I have absolutely great memories of that, and I'm dying to hear the talk today. So thank you all for being here. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Commodore. Good on you, mate. A few data points. So our clubhouse, the one we're in right now, which is on city land, is on the books with a value of $24 million. Our Tinsley Island is on the books and worth more than, but on the books at $12 million. We're going to hear today about an asset which is worth 1/3 of all the assets of our yacht club. And it was basically created by the hard sweat and tears of our own membership. And to tell that story better than anyone else could, we have 6 of the founding families of Tinsley. Your names are up here. Can we please have Ed Brovelli, Buzz Cox, whose grandfather wrote the check to buy Tinsley, and Judy Wall, and Joe Pietman, and Tom Moseley. Would you guys please come on up here and be seated? Ed Brovelli, alphabetically from audience left to right. Let's give these guys a real applause. Good heavens sakes alive. Barbara Gilmore, where is Barbara Gilmore? Come on up, Barbara. Take your place on the podium. These are founding families at Tinsley. Pretty impressive. Amazing. Help Barbara up, please, Ryan. Lady, boys. Petey, Gilmore. It's alphabetical left to right. All set here. Get rid of this. Get rid of this one. Okay. One more microphone. Who else needs a mic? You take it, Judy. Thanks. Okay, Tommy, if you'll put the slide on and you'll give me sound here. Okay, I have sound. I do? I do. Great. Yeah, hold on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're really close. Oh, boy. Don't get all excited and start jumping around. Yeah, I'm off the press too. I'd have to take care of you again. Yes. You'd be good at it.
Tom, can you get the screen up, please? My screen? No, that's not the first slide, though. Yeah, that's Tom. It is. It is. No, that's not. Tom, I'm looking at it right here. Take a look here. So I want to thank, we've been doing, this is my 16th year chairing the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. And, we've had something north of 700 speakers. But this last year, starting at the beginning of the year, with the good services of our innovative member, Tom Eamon, and Judy Hirsch, and Bob Sky, we've been able to send our luncheons now to 30 times a big audience. So we've been averaging 56 people per luncheon more today, and online we've had over 95,000 since the beginning of the year. So we're something north of 1,800 per average, and the highest are around the 4,000 views. And we're about to upgrade all the gear. These cameras were the result of me walking into Best Buy and saying, how much for that camera? $120. I'll take 3. Well, we're about to have 3 cameras that cost $3,300 each, not $120 each. So we're about to upgrade them quite a bit. So Tommy, can we get my image? Okay. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Ed, your mic back. So to tell the story of Tinsley, it's obviously a project that's taken decades, and thus we brought all this panel together. So I'm going to flip through an inordinate number of slides, and we're going to stop all the way along the path to have a firsthand oral history account of people who were actually there at the time. So we're used to seeing this beautiful image that you see on the screen now of Tinsley, because if you go there right now, it's a knockout and you can see it. But originally, it looked more like this, okay? And you take a look at Tinsley Island in the very beginning, and you see that there's no lighthouse. We don't have a berm all the way around it. And in these days, it took foresight, and where is Buzzy? So it took foresight, and somebody wrote a check to buy the island to begin with. And they were going to buy Tinsley Island. Where did the name Tinsley come from, you might ask yourself? Well, this entire talk happened and is the genesis of one member here, Freddie Krause, who can tell that story. Freddie, where are you? Okay, Freddie, stand up for a second and tell us where Tinsley, the name, came from, please. He proposed, pass this out to Ryan, pass that to Freddie. So Freddie Krause came to me about 8 months ago and said, Ron, Tinsley, we got to tell the story, how it all began. And so this is all to the credit of our buddy Freddie. Freddie, where'd the name come from for Tinsley?
Tinsley Island in the early 1900s was a fishing camp, and the family's name was Tinsley. They were Indians, and they would net the salmon going up the San Joaquin River and then sell it to the restaurants here in San Francisco. Now, I worked with a tugboat captain named Bill Tinsley. It happened to be with Smith Rice, who picked up the lighthouse off Southampton Shoal, put it on the Crowley barges, and took it up there. And he was part of the Smith Rice team when they took the lighthouse up there. His name was Bill Tinsley. I'm sure he's gone now. Also, Bud Rice passed away last month. He was 85.
And Bud Rice's role in bringing the lighthouse up?
Smith Rice had the crane barges, and Tom Crowley had the tugboats. In the beginning, I can tell you, the Southampton Shoals Lighthouse had to be unbolted from the Southampton Shoal, and this was all paid for by the Bud and Tom Crowley, who donated the material, the manpower, and the cranes. Then, before they got to Tinsley Island, they had to drive piles in the peat so the lighthouse wouldn't sink. If you can look underneath the lighthouse sometime, you'll see it's on steel beams.
Thank you, Freddie, and thanks for dreaming this up. Perfect. Okay, Tommy, I'm gonna flip to another slide. Okay, so here we have Tinsley. You see the first lagoon. We're gonna show pictures. Keep going here. Brovelli, when was the first time you ever went to Tinsley Island? What year was it? Can you describe the first vision of Tinsley that you have?
I don't remember the first time I went there.
There's an honest man.
It must have been, I think the island was a couple of years old by the time I got there, but I have a lot of stories, of course, I've heard about it, because my father was one of the founders of the island. But it was desolate, and of course there was no lanai, where there's a bonfire place on the, over by the houseboats. That was where the barbecue pits were, I believe. And it was desolate. And at high, if it rained, we had a lot of water in there, and in some high tides, it inundated the island. But there was a lot of foresight went into that whole development. And I don't want to belabor that right now, but I could probably talk for an hour about that. Anyhow.
So next to Ed is Buzz Cox. Buzz Cox, tell us a little bit about your grandpa and a certain piece of authorship he had on a little piece of paper.
Yeah. Grandpa Tate, his name was Bill Tate, joined back in the 40s. And he became chairman in 59 when the island was bought. And everybody knows the name Denny Jordan. Denny was vice commodore, I think we all know that, and decided to have a Stag Cruise. Everybody had been going up to Grindstone Joe's. And I'm not old enough to really remember a lot of this, but I believe they were not welcome back for some reason. And so that sent Denny Jordan scrambling for another place to host. It hadn't been called the Stag Cruise yet, but to host it. And he cruised the river and found Lost Isle. And I guess we all know the first Stag Cruise was on Lost Isle. And Lost Isle was either for sale or not for sale. Who knows? It's always been, ownership has always been questionable. But Grandpa was building a plant up in Stockton, and he knew a fellow named Malcolm Matheson, who was very responsible for actually knowing where Tinsley was. He was a title officer, and he and my granddad flew over Tinsley and looked at it, because my granddad says, we're looking for a place. Well, it hadn't been decided yet, so Grandpa basically got an option. I think it was $1,000. I don't even know if an option to purchase for $1,000, and I don't know if he actually wrote the check for it, but he came back. He liked to get repaid for things, and I know he went to the board. I believe he was chairman then, and he said, "Look, I got this island," and Denny did not want this. He wanted Lost Isle because they had the first Stag Cruise there. And so during their discussions, they decided not to do the Tinsley Island. So there used to be a round table. You sit under a tin roof here. and all the members used to gather and make the deals. And so I guess 10 guys got together, put up the $100 each for the option. And eventually, and Ed will have to clarify a lot of this, but eventually the board decided, because they weren't able to get Lost Isle, they decided to take Tinsley on. And they bought Tinsley Island, and I believe maybe 10 members put up 1,000 each or something.
11 people.
11 people. And
That was where your grandfather was very smart, because he recognized that if he tried to sell the island, if he bought it, easily he could have bought the whole thing. If he presented it to the membership, they would think he was getting a windfall.
oh yeah,
So he says, look, if we all put up $1,000, they can't say we're getting very rich on this thing if we sell it back to them for $1,000, which they did.
so that's kind of how it got started. And there's one other story I'll tell you. There's a plaque up there, which Ed's father's on.
This is
my
a great story.
father's on, and there were only at one time 10 people, or whoever, 11, whatever there were, on this original plaque. One name was absent was Mr. Jordan, and Mr. Jordan at that time wanted Lost Isle. Well, anyways, we all know Tinsley became an item of ownership, and Denny was probably the biggest spearhead of all that made Tinsley what it is today. But meanwhile, there's this plaque without his name on it, and a few other fellows that had done so much. And so their father and argue about it. They all got mad, put a plaque. I think there's 16 names up on it now at the lighthouse, and threw the other one in the water. Well,
The original
plaque, and I'm
without
not,
Denny's name on it.
without the one without his name, and a few others that have done so darn much. But anyway, I heard from Tom Conroy, and so it's not an AK, it's a Conroy. He tells me the story that fishermen, and I believe it might be in our archives, found this plaque with the original members on it, and he'd fished it up, and I guess it came back to the yacht club for some reason. Obviously, it's theirs, and I don't know where it is today. It's not up there on the wall. Matter of fact, I was there a couple days ago, and I took a picture to make sure. But no, it's 16 names are on there, and one of them is Ed's dad too. So anyway, that's kind of my story, my grandpa.
Great. So the story about Denny, who we told it in front of Denny many times to get the timing just right. He called a meeting of the membership, a special meeting when he's Commodore, and said, is there a motion? And someone said, yes, there's a motion. A motion, we buy Tinsley for the price the original purchasers paid for it. Is there a second? Yes, there's a second. Any discussion? Lots of discussion. Denny said, I call the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Few people, no. Then he said, is there another motion? Motion to adjourn, is there a second? Yes, there's a second. Meeting is adjourned. And the whole meeting, when we officially got it, according to Denny, was a whole less than a minute, 50 seconds. And many of us told that story. Conroy taught me that story back in the early 60s, so we would tell it appropriately with Denny's blessing. So next person we're going to talk to is seen here. We're going to jump ahead. Tommy, I got to see my screen if I may, please. So back in these days before we have a lighthouse, we see the island. This is the corner where the lighthouse is now, as you can see it, with the manager's trailer. No lighthouse. Manager's trailer, no lighthouse. Here we have, this is pre-swimming pool. Now, Barbara, who knows about this? Judy Wall knows this picture? This is Natcher. Oh, Dave Natcher. No. Hand him. This is Levels. Buzzy, would you hand a mic over to Dave?
Another junior member. Yeah.
Oh, those
Dave.
were the days. It says manager's trailer. That's obviously not the manager's trailer. That was Lev Olds' Jolly Roger, a 40-foot Elco. And that was in summer of '59. The picture before that, let's go back. The picture before that. This was taken aboard Denny Jordan's powerboat, the Plaisir, in sometime early 1959. And it shows the dredging operation going into what is now the Houseboat Lagoon. And it was really rough then because the spoils were put on the ground and let to dry out before they graded and compacted. So you couldn't really walk around a lot. You could bust your ankle doing that. Big pardon?
What about permits?
What? What? You know, things were different back then.
We don't need no stinking badges?
They know stinking badges. They didn't have a lot of that stuff back then, so I don't know. And then there's a story about Levolds and harnessing that dredge to make Old's cut. And I don't think that's accurate. That's a pretty elaborate piece of equipment. I think there was a cut there just for drainage or for circulation. And the story I heard was he took the Jolly Roger and backed through it at high, with the propellers going, and just cleared the way. And so I think he went back and forth a couple of times, I don't know, but then it became Old's Cut, which is a very convenient way to get in and out of the main lagoon. So that's all I know about that. But anyway, Denny took my father and my mother and me, and I don't know who else was there, I think that's it, to see what Tinsley looked like just after we purchased it. And then a few months later, they put in the dock, and that's it. You can see a little bit of lawn over there to the left, and you can also see, whoop, we lost it. You can see way over to the left, there's some beams. They're putting up the lanai. And so, no pool.
No pool yet.
And
No pool.
And the only restroom facilities on land were a couple outhouses, so it's changed, yes.
Wonderful. Barbara Gilmore, when did you first show up? When did you first come to the island?
I first went.
Microphone, Tommy. Tom, we help her with
I
that.
first went to the inauguration of the island in 1961, and they had Francis Moffat interviewed and covered it for the society page for the kicking off of the club.
Mrs. Edward B. Gilmore.
So the result of this was my husband and I, Ed, had only belonged to the club for about a year. And I had two small children, and the result was I didn't know very many of the women because Ed was 20 years older than I was, and all the members' wives were likewise 20 years older than I was. So I was in my early 20s and was just busy doing children, babies. So we left the two
You mean tending
home.
to them or making them?
We
Or?
left the two of them home. That weekend we left the two home, and we only had a speedboat then, and he had made reservation at a hotel in Corth's Landing, which is a slough. And so we went up to that at the end of this day. It was all partying on Baruna and Bolero, and there was a lot of festivities for this opening event. And the funny thing was, I had known this photographer through social stuff that I had done, and so he picked me out, and everybody was like, when it made the paper, who is she?
So this is August 16th, 1961, the paper, the story in the Examiner, right there. August 16, 1961.
But then when we went, we're going the next summer. It was just, I was pregnant all summer, and just the other two. And all my friends were going to Hawaii and Tahoe and all these exotic places. And they asked me where I was going, and they didn't call it wasn't glamorous then. They didn't call it the Delta. So I said, I'm going to Stockton.
Not Hawaii.
And they looked at me like, why are you going to Stockton?
I'm going to go back, Tom. Our next speaker, none other than, you've heard of the Tinsley Playhouse. Well, so we're about to hear from Tom Moseley. You can't read this really carefully, but thank you. This is the main sheet. Main sheet, 2 words in those days. July 1960. And it says, it's there. Southampton Lighthouse is at Tinsley Island. And what was only a good idea a short time ago is now an accomplished fact. thanks to the great deal of time and effort by several members, not the least of them, Bill Tate, who we've heard from by his grandson, coordinator of the project. And it goes through and it writes all about it. It says, at this writing, more than $5,700 has been chucked into the kitty to refurbish the building. We read farther down, you see for $1.50 you can go up and stay on the island. So Tom Moseley, whose father, Tim Moseley, was incredibly important. I sailed on their boat, the Orient, when I was a little teenage boy. Tom, talk to us about the first time you ever went to Tinsley.
I think that was in like 1960, and you know, I went up there with my dad, and you know, we went out, and the only thing that was at Tinsley was some grass, a few picnic tables, and huge mosquitoes. And there was absolutely nothing. And of course, my dad was a developer, and he was telling me about how we were going to dredge this, how all the stuff. I'm going, what's going to happen? How's this going to come about? And he said, you know, we'll just keep on going, and that's what he did. He and Ed Brovelli were very close, and they put barges together. They got a lot of things going, and they really knew how the island was going to come out. I had no idea at the time. It looked to me like, oh my God, what are we into? So those days, you know, through the 60s, there was a lot of work to be done. You know, the infrastructure was not there. The lighthouse came up, but there was nothing. They had, you know, they put the pool in and the bathhouse in order to get more people from the city club. You know, the city club wasn't really too enamored about how great Tinsley was. You know, we were all, once we saw it start to move ahead, everybody thought, man, this is a great place. But here in the city club, they were not so, you know, they were not so supportive of why are we going up to this island in the Delta. But the Stag Cruise guys, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were going to put that thing together no matter what. So they kept at it, and you could just see every year the place just grew like crazy. And the dredging continued. I have never seen dredging like that. You know, you dredge the part of the island, and the bottom comes right back up because it was all peat. But the thing was that they, you know, all the spoils that went in the center of the island, I mean, you could grow anything. That's why all those trees are there, the palm trees and all the rest of the stuff. I mean, it was just so fertile because of the peat. And, you know, then the houseboats came. They came slowly along. And the dredging was the main thing, to get around the island. There was a lot of talk about, you know, the whole perimeter canal around the island. And a lot of people didn't want to do that. There was, you know, we're going to wreck the trees, we're going to ruin, you know, the local stuff. In fact, I remember Shirley Dana, when we got around by the West Dock, there was a tree there. It's dead now, but she tied herself to the tree so the old man wouldn't take it out. And so, but I mean, you know, Mike Cheney came along because they were talking about the floods. I mean, the island flooded every year. Anytime there was, you know, any kind of storms or high tide, it was a lake. So Cheney came and they built the berm, which helped a lot. They got after us about, you know, all the septic, because we've taken 500 or 600 guys up there. You know, the septic tanks were not going to happen. That's when the sewer plant got built. So that all happened. You know, it's just it's an amazing thing to watch a piece of dirt that was, you know, these guys, Denny and my dad and Ed, and there was a bunch of them that just, there was nothing that was going to stand in their way. They knew exactly what they were going to see and what they were going to come up with. So it was a pretty amazing thing to watch.
Next is Joe Pietman, who took an interest in Mr. Brovelli's sister. Joe talked to and became his brother-in-law in due time. Your first memories of Tinsley. Joe.
Angela and I were married in 1958. We got out of the Army in 57.
Busted, Joe. Busted.
I knew she should have stayed home. And we came back to Napa in 1959, and Ed's father was president of Basalt Rock Company. Basalt Rock Company, well, he was executive vice president at that time. Al Streblo was still alive. Basalt had the contract with the Corps of Engineers to protect the levees in the entire delta. And barge after barge after barge of riprap went from the near quarry up onto the banks of all these rivers. So he knew all the people in the Corps of Engineers, and he knew the farmers. I remember coming up here, and we'd go to the farmhouse, and they'd give him some ducks they'd shot that morning, and some tomatoes that were table ripe. It was really good. So one time we come up here, it had to be in the summer of 1959, and that first picture, when there's nothing there. There. We were in the lagoon. You can see toward the bottom of the picture. Dutra was in there with a dredge. I think his name was Emile Dutra. I think the company's still there in Rio Vista. Is it Ed Dutra? Ed Dutra, yeah, the old man. Oh, he was an old man, I remember that. And we got up on that dredge, and Grandpa and I, Ed Brovelli, Sr., and they were tickled to death because they were getting sand from the dredge to put up where the lanai is now.
To fill it in.
They thought that was a lot better than peat. I remember that. And then he told me about some meetings, or a meeting at least, that took place at what we called then Dante Namalini's Duck Club, which I now think is called Baron Hilton's Duck Club. And there was maybe 10, 12 boats there. And Denny Jordan was, of course, leading the thing. Ed in those days had a boat called Tima, and he was there. I know Levy Oles was there, and I'm sure Malcolm Matheson was there. I'm not sure who else was there.
Wonderful. And next in line is Judy Wall, and if you've been to the island, you know that their houseboat Waldorf, you've been thinking, because Judy is married to Marty Wall, great volleyball player and member of our club, you've been thinking all these years that Waldorf was named after Judy Wall and Waldorf. But tell us the real story of, was it the first or the second houseboat that was built for the island?
We were the second houseboat, and we came.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. We were the second houseboat. It came in 1961, July 4th, 1961. And the first houseboat was Ingy Reed, and he was a Commodore, a past Commodore from 1944. And so my dad gave him the first choice of where to put the houseboat, and we took the second choice. So that's my mom. There it is in Stockton being built at Stevens Brothers. And then my mom is, I think the slide before, that was on Tinsley. And when my mother was there, my parents had lived in New Orleans, and only trash lived on houseboats in New Orleans. And there was my mother, and my father has convinced my mother to have a houseboat, and she's not too impressed with this here. So anyhow, come the morning, the first morning on Tinsley, my mother wakes up, and there comes my father with Bloody Marys in bed for my mother, and she says, "Oh, this is better than the Waldorf."
That's wonderful, wonderful. And that's how the second houseboat got named Waldorf. Wonderful. Breakfast in bed. What a lesson. Joe, you can still handle breakfast in bed, can't you? She'll forgive you for the 57, 58 discrepancy. Perfect. Yes, please. Angie.
Has anybody been to the island before 1958?
Angie, we're handing you a
Anyway,
mic, Angie.
there was room for just a couple of ships to tie along a makeshift dock, and my parents took Joe and I and our new baby up to see the island that was going to be developed. So I know very well that was 1958.
Wonderful.
And we were married in 57 because it took a year to get that baby.
Yeah, pass it. You got it right there, Barbara. Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
She was mentioning the Bloody Marys. I don't know who remembers this, but my husband Ed and his dad Ed were great cat fishermen. And so they would catfish all summer long, gut them and clean them and put them in a freezer. And then at the end of summer, they'd have this big party, and Ed Brovelli Sr. would make fabulous Bloody Marys for the whole island, and the mothers would cook all the catfish. So we had this big catfish party. Remember that?
I do, and I think the good doctor was there also.
Yeah.
That's a lot of things that I'd like to say. For one is that Frank Cox, Judy's father, made a great contribution to the island in the early years because he mended all kinds of injuries and people at his expense. I mean, there was never a bill sent, and it was we owe him a great thank you for all those things he provided. There's a couple of things I'd like to just say.
Please, Eddie.
David, regarding Old's Cut, I don't know where you got that story, but I was firsthand.
This is an oral history, after all.
What happened was the yacht club had bought a landing barge, and the old furniture and everything in this room, etc., was loaded into it, plus a washing machine and a dryer. And Levy Olds, Commodore Olds, was going to drive the boat up there, and I was the crew with him. This is a landing barge, 7 knots. And I hope we had a tide with us. I can't remember, but Levy had a great sense of humor, and he says, as long as we got the washer and the dryer here, he says, let's fill it with ice, and we'll get some gin and vodka and some beer. And we'll drive it up. And he said, there was no cabin on that first landing barge. So by the time we got up there, we were pretty roasted. Levy says, we've been only running this thing at 7 knots. He says, what do you think if we see that cut right there? I said, yeah. He says, you think we could go through there? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, if I rev it up, you think we'll try it? And that's what. So we wound that thing as fast as we could. We ran up there. It was only about 4 feet deep, and I think that barge was about 6 feet. But we got it. And that's how it was named Old's Cut. And then I guess later on we stretched it out some more, and it's been useful. But you're not far off. He did do it, and he did do it with those props on that thing. I was very young at that time, so I was still in my 20s. He was, And by the way, mentioning Levy Olds, Commodore Olds, in our book today, his wife is still a member. Which would make her certainly 100 years old or more.
I called and didn't get an answer. Yes, right. I hunted for her. Eddie, good story, mate. Yes, Barbara. Barbara Gilmore.
Of course, most of my stories are regarding my 3 rugrats. And
we have a couple of the rugrats here. Petey, stand up. Where's Tommy?
Tom.
Where's Kate?
But anyway, in the following year, when I had all 3, there were 4, 2, and a new baby. And we went up for 2 weeks in 92. And we docked. 62. And we docked, and all of a sudden, Dr. Cox came down, and they said this washing machine that these guys brought was in the lighthouse. That's where it was, in the kitchen. But it wasn't working. So Dr. Cox and Jack Van Wert, they called the club, and like you said, they weren't too swift on spending money at Tinsley. So when they said we needed a new washing machine, they said, well, what do we need a washing machine? People come up for the weekend, they go back home, they take their dirty clothes. And they said, yes, but the Gilmores are here with 2 in diapers. So they said, oh, okay, and that was before disposables. So Jack and Dr. Cox got up early on Monday, and they were down at the Macy's loading dock, picked up a new washing machine, and came back up and had it installed by 10 o'clock. But they had no dryer, so now I have to dry them. They had a clothesline from the lighthouse to a tree. And I hung all the diapers up one by one. But by the time I got to the end, because of the warm wind, the first ones were already dry. So I just went back and took them all down.
That's a great story.
So that's my
Tom, as we flip through more slides, we'll have some more stories. So this is a Waldorf with Yankee Peddler next. Judy, you want to talk a little bit about?
That is actually a picture from the Stag Cruise. The fellow that's sitting in the front was a friend of my dad's, a doctor from San Diego, who used to come up for the Stag Cruise. And Yankee Peddler used to dock on our houseboat. You'll see that there is one story only because it was a single story. But 2, there's nothing behind it.
No other
houseboats at all. So that was before 1963 when the Brovellis came in. But so there, and that is from the lighthouse, looking down at the main dock, again during a Stag Cruise. It's the only time we had that many. And you can see
Speaking
the
of
Gilmore.
diapers.
Yes. And Tom Conroy at the,
Katie?
there, right there.
3.
3.
Speaking of Conroy,
Oh.
they want to know about the goat.
The goat lived there. Yeah. The goat lived on the island, and it was a lawnmower, and he got moved from area to area, and you couldn't drive a lawnmower because it was too boggy, and so we used the goat, and we had a goat and a sheep.
Speaking of farm animals, can we switch back to the Conroy picture? Now, it's been a while. So Eddie, take a look at this picture. And Tom, what do you figure the vintage this is? This is an early Stag Cruise performance. That looks a little bit like Tom's face in the middle, but he's not tall enough. But who do you think we're looking at here?
I think we're looking at Leonard Delmas.
Lenny. Lenny. There we go. Great.
All right, that picture,
That's Bill Ritter.
It's Bill Ritter, and the picture is in my bathroom at Tinsley because they used as a form. Well, no, not as a dressing room, but they had it on paper, and they signed it. Your dad signed it, my dad, and various and sundry other gentlemen signed it because it was in the Stag Cruise, and that's what they used as a model to put the paint on. So the model is up in my bathroom right now with all those names on it.
I got a Frank Cox story.
Yes, please, Joe.
My grandson, Bill Pietman, is here. When his father was 3 or 4
let's have a
years
hand
old,
up.
I'll probably get corrected again. He walked through the fire pit the next day and burned his feet. And he comes whining back to the houseboat and, what's the matter? Geez, we looked at his feet and he was hurt. We took him over to Frank Cox, and Frank Cox at the time was head of orthopedic surgery at the University of California, and he casted him. That's what you do when you're an orthopedic surgeon. You put casts on. I never forgot that.
He did, and the rest of us young people were challenged by carrying Billy all over the island because he couldn't walk on on these little socks. And so we carried him for a couple of weeks until his feet healed.
A couple more pictures of Waldorf in '66 in the winter. This is Petey and a friend. Talk about rabbits on the island. He wants to make a comment about that.
Judy.
We used to have rabbits on the island, and they would come out in the early evening, about cocktail time. And so you would be at the barbecue, the barbecue was on the other side of the lanai, as it is now. And these rabbits would come out, and over by the houseboats, you got there on a little tiny aisleway, and the rabbits would all come out there. And we kids would chase the rabbits. You would come up behind a rabbit and then try to catch it, and we never caught it. But anyhow, the adults would offer us money or offer us sodas or offer us things if we would just go catch a rabbit. So while all of us were all running over there catching rabbits, they were having the Bloody Marys.
Go ahead, Joe. You were at a story about?
Well, there were ducks and geese all over the island in the early days, and they loved the houseboats. They loved the houseboats to defecate on, and we were always washing
Stuff.
duck and goose manure off of our decks on the houseboat. And, I guess they got on the boats too, didn't they? At any rate, I remember that.
So, Judy, the first houseboat, yours was the first built, but the second installed. The first one went to Ingy Reed. Exactly.
Ingraham Reed.
There he is.
He was publisher of the Chronicle.
No, the
Tribune, the Oakland Tribune.
Oakland Tribune.
This is a picture right here.
Oh, I got it half right.
Yeah, that's my dad is on the right, and Ingy Reed was on the left, and he
Keep the
had-
mic.
No, this one doesn't work. Try it. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Ingy Reed was the
Header of the trip.
the head of the trib, but he had been a Commodore in 1944, so we thought he really knew what was going on. And so, and he and his wife were great cooks, and we spent a lot of time with them.
But you gave them the honor of being the first boat there.
Well, he was the first, because he was the Commodore, he got the first choice. And the boats were built together, but his boat was towed down the river the week before our boat was towed down the river.
Wonderful. Eddie.
Well, first of all, I'd like to remind everybody that a lot of these original people contributed their own time and money. For instance, Commodore Moseley, Tom's father, built that clubhouse, that stage
Playhouse.
at his own expense. I think he spent a couple of weeks up there of his vacation building it, things like that. Same thing was true as the installation of the houseboat when it first got moved up there. My father, I know, was one of them, but I'm sure there were several other members whose name I can't remember. But there's important names like Charlie Query, who had a lot to do with helping get tugboats and et cetera. He worked for a company called J.C. Freeze. I don't know if it's still around anymore, but he connected on the waterfront here. General Brannigan got us all kinds of he was a Corps of Engineer, yeah. and he got us permits, et cetera, for a lot of things. I don't know, somebody in this room, maybe somebody like Bob Keefe might know if we paid anything for that lighthouse, but I know it was a property, I think, of the federal government at that time.
I thought it was $1. Tom, do you know about that?
I don't know that.
Freddie, do you know about that? Yeah, I stand up. One, yeah, as I recall, it was $1. Correct. Right.
Thank you.
That's right. It was government surplus, $1. So,
And
Tom,
there was a lower floor to that houseboat.
yes, the
You must
original.
remember that.
The bottom of it.
Originally, there was 3 stories when we used to sail around it at Southampton Shoals in the 50s. So, Tom Moseley, can you remember? Have a mic? Joey, hand him a mic. Can you remember the playhouse being built by your dad and the boys?
Oh yeah, that was a. I guess does this work?
Yes. Yes, works great.
That was a huge topic of conversation in our house for years. And I remember one time, one Monday morning, my dad was having breakfast, and he's going like, "I'm getting this the stage together," and he said, "You know, can you believe this? We have 3 architects up there. None of them know how to lay out stairs." He had a great time building that playhouse. That was something that he just thought we really needed for the Stag Cruise, and it was. So it really, and it's still there today. So it's pretty good.
So great, Tom. Mike,
I told you, Ed's father was president of Basalt Rock Company. All of a sudden, the lanai got built, and there's basalt pavers under all the tables, and the barbecues were built out of basalt block. And I don't know who paid for what, but I suspect that if the yacht club paid anything, they got a pretty good deal.
I think the basalt shareholders paid for that.
and for those in the audience here today, you might not imagine how hard it was for us young people to look at the island and imagine what the visionaries had in mind. The first time I went to the Delta was in '57 in the Sea Scout Ship Ranger, and by the time I was graduated from high school in '61, myself and 2 buddies sailed our 210, which is a 30-foot open cockpit boat with no cabin, up to the Delta for 3 weeks. We left with $21 worth of booze, which some adult bought for us, and $14 worth of food. We were up there for 3 weeks. We came back with $10 worth of food. We learned the secret if you're young boys, teenage boys in a sailboat is to find cute girls whose fathers owned big boats. That was, you could be invited as a dinner guest. We were all polite, and we got invited. So we, while we're up there, Jack Hedden had been talking, and Denny had been talking about Tinsley. So we sail there, and when we sail up to Tinsley, we tie starboard side to, and it looks like you saw the early pictures. It was nothing, and none of us had any vision about what it was ultimately going to look like. So the 2 guys, Bob LaSalle and Frank Sarah, and I got off the boat, walked around the island. No, we're not going to stick around here. There's too many adults. Why do we want to be here? We want to go up the steamboat slough and the landing and that. So we left after like about a half of an hour, not realizing that, 40 years later, our children, Barbara, my wife Barbara, and I, all of our children would grow up playing on Tinsley because of the vision of these, our panelists today, and all of their friends of the day. Once more, a hand for our panelists. Now we're going to, later on you'll be able to see this. It's going into the archive of Wednesday Yachting Luncheon Talks, and we have incredible slides, more than we knew we could show, but I wanted the slides all to be available, so you'll all be able to go online and see more than 100 slides of archival shots and so on. So let me ask another comment. Judy, you want to say anything else about so when people started, how'd you find Marty Wall? Was there a name similarity? How'd you pick a guy whose name would be perfect for the houseboat?
No, he did not know what a boat was. We had some real issues. He did not know what a boat was. He came from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he played basketball. All I cared about is he was taller than I was.
Eddie.
Ron, I think everybody ought to know that I taught Judy Cox Wall how to water ski.
He did. He did.
How old were you, Judy?
Oh.
Did you teach her how to drive a speedboat?
Don't stop that. No. have to be quiet about that one. We're not telling that story at all. No, how old was I? Probably, I think.
16, 17?
Oh, no. I was closer to about 12 or 13. Yeah. Yeah, I was 16, 17 back when I was playing with Rick Niles way back then. And Chris. Yeah. No.
Tom Moseley,
Hey, let me
tell
have
us
this.
about.
Let me say something. I see
Please, Buzzy.
Chris Boom and Rick Niles out here, fellow junior members with Stan and Denny Jr. And I learned to water ski, and Rick doesn't even remember it from Rick. He used to go. He was about a year or two older than me, maybe a bit, but his voice changed before mine did. My mother never let me forget it. And Chris, during the 60s, he was the first sailing instructor up there as a young member. And all these guys have tales that are much better than mine, but I sure remember them doing things and I watching your results. Here you go.
Tommy, talk about raising the boys on the island all the time. Your dad's great project turned out to be this amazingly cool
the
thing.
thing was, when they were little, it was really interesting because Peter, that second summer or third summer, was only crawling. And he wasn't walking. And he would wake up on the boat in the morning and be this catastrophe, just being in this space. I had to get up about 6:30, grab him, run up on the island, and all the sprinklers were on then. And I had to run through all the sprinklers to get him to the lighthouse so he could crawl on that carpet the whole length of it. And then his father didn't want him falling off the boat, so he had a harness that he put on him and hooked to the main deal, and he could crawl all around the boat. And if he fell, he would be swinging, and he would And then my husband would have to go and rescue him, but it never fell in, so that was good.
I got one on the sprinklers, which again, these two fellows will tell you more about it, but used to be no age limits going up there, I believe. I'm not quite sure of that, but you used to go down 8-mile ride, see if you get a ride over to the island, you'd sleep out on what little grass there was. And they'd turn on the sprinklers in the morning and you had to get out of there. But a lot of times we got a little smarter, slept on the floor of the lighthouse, which that was a no-no. I believe the first Pat was up there, or even before that, they'd get you out of there. But those are kind of my memories, and I know there's so many more. Dewey's probably got 1,000 of them that he could bring up because he knows. But anyway, that's my little stalking.
So we are now reminded with this panel here that, in fact, Tinsley Island is an incredible, integral, gorgeous part of our club. And it's completely poetic that this year, the chairmen of the Stag Cruise are Taylor Stein and our Petey Gilmore. Boys, thank you. Congratulations. Petey, closing marks, buddy?
Yeah, Pete Gilmore. And that picture was me with the rabbit. And just, excuse the pun, but to tail onto your story about the rabbits, there were a lot of them on the island. They multiply. But we came back one year. Well, let me back up a little bit. There was an island manager named Pat, and I think he was
McCarthy.
Yeah, I think he was about 400 pounds or so. So he was a well-fed man. And a former military man. He had tattoos, and I think it took that kind of guy to want to manage that island in the early stages. But there wasn't a lot for the kids to do, so we would naturally get into trouble here and there. But backing up to where I was with the rabbit, we came back the next year, and all the rabbits were gone. And all of us kids were like, what happened to all the rabbits? So the story was that Pat ate them over the winter. So, needless to say, the kids were very well behaved that summer because we were afraid of Pat, for sure.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining the Wednesday yachting luncheon. And if you like the Tinsley and you like the lighthouse, you should know we now have a puzzle in the gift painted by our own member Jimmy DeWitt. It's available in the gift store, and we can have a puzzle of the Tinsley Lighthouse. And I want to thank our panelists, Ed Brovelli and Buzz Cox and Barbara Gilmore and Tom Moseley and Joe Peatman and Judy Wall. Thank you so much for bringing back Tinsley. And with that, our luncheon is adjourned.
You're a good heart.
For those who want to see it, we'll show the whole deck on the screen too. Go ahead, Tommy. 100 slides. Yeah, don't worry about audio. And now we're going to play the long 100 slides slideshow on the Tinsley Lighthouse. Yep.